welcome everybody. I'm Ray Pultinas from James Baldwin Outdoor Learning Center. And I'm so fortunate to be in the company of readers of James Baldwin who are taking, helping us to get deeper into his work. And I read this now for the second time, this book. I read it as I was teaching it back in the day. I started teaching it kind of like I was so into James Baldwin at the time that I just wanted to, continue to work on his novels. But it's quite a different experience. I think I was very almost frightened and as I read certain parts that my students were about to read also, just language and things like this, and concerned that I would, somehow I stand to regret assigning this book at the time. But, I'm just reading it so much different as an adult, kind of through my own lenses. And thanks, Carole, for leading us in this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you, Ray. And we will turn things over to Carole. I don't know, do we want to introduce ourselves again? I mean, I've just introduced myself, but if you want to say a quick hello and how you doing?
Howdy.
That's Anna Vasquez Howard.
Anna.
Of the Bronx. She's back. Thank you. Richard.
Hello, everybody. Richard, working with JBOLC and James Baldwin fan, and enjoy this experience or trip that I'm on. I'm not sure which it is.
Both.
Both.
Probably both, exactly.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes it better. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Soon.
I think we had.
Yes,
Hey,
hi. My name is Song. Nice to meet you all. And I usually don't read books, but this opportunity, I really enjoyed reading the book, and I was kind of sad to finish the book. But
Thank you, Song. So for the people who just came in, we're just introducing ourselves. Lucinda, you don't have to turn on your camera. If you don't respond, I'll just move on. You're muted. How you doing? You're muted.
I'm trying this on my. Okay. Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Yes, I'm here, Lucinda Clark from Augusta, Georgia, and so I am just interested in hearing this evening's conversation.
Cool. Thank you so much. Jazzy, our resident yogi.
Hi. And yeah, I'm just here to hang out with y'all, be in community, and go further in this book. It's been very challenging going through this book for me. So it's great to be in this conversation and kind of like clarify things and kind of understand more his writing and how he puts this story together, because it's been very hard.
Thank you, Jazz. Stacy Joyner. Again, you don't have to turn on your camera or your mic. I'll just move on to the next person if you don't respond. Simone Love.
Hi guys.
Hey,
I'm here from New York City, and it's just a pleasure to be on with you guys and just hearing, people's different opinions and thoughts about his work. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this evening.
Thank you, Simone. So this is our community. You bring your own culture and history and stories to this conversation. Carole will be leading it. She'll have some questions for us, maybe some prompts for us, but you participate at the level you can. We try to treat everyone equally in this space, so don't feel any obligation to speak. But your voice is important, but it's not required. With that said, Carole?
Thank you.
Thank you, Carole.
I don't know how to, do I just leave my screen as it is, I guess, or?
It looks good.
Okay, fine. Well, thank you all for being a part of this. Curious, Jasmine, if you don't mind, I am a great believer in questions and us learning from our questions, and I have plenty and I will get into them, but I'm actually very intrigued by your comment and would love for you to share a little more of why did you find the experience of reading this so challenging, and what questions do you have that you might like to throw out for all of us to consider before I get started?
Okay, throwing me on the spot. It's I don't know if it's the way it's written, but like it took me and it's still taking me a while for me to figure out that like the way it's like the point of view. I didn't know I was reading from the point of view of Rufus, and then it kind of goes straight into like the story, and just kind of like, okay, what am I reading again? And I have to go back and reread certain things to understand, okay, they're in a relationship, and then it goes to this, and it goes to this. So I think it could be probably the way I'm interpreting the way it's being written. But it has taken me a little bit of like, okay, stopping, then rereading, and then, okay, this is where the point of view is coming from. So I don't have a real question other than I wanted to see what other people were experiencing, or maybe like, oh, that's what it was talking about there.
Okay.
Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, of course it makes sense. Yeah. And the reason I asked is exactly what you just said. I think what you are picking up is really important. If we consider, and it is considered, that this is part of what is called fiction. It's a novel. Therefore, it is a quote made up story, but as we discussed last session, and as I am always talking to people about, I don't believe any writing of such magnitude is fiction. I always believe that it reveals so much about the life of the writer in different ways if we're willing to look at it, unless it officially is put into some category of made up stuff from another universe and so on. So it's very intriguing to me that you picked up on the concept that is real important here, which is narration. So who tells the story? And in this case, I can see why it might be challenging if you haven't read a lot of fiction, and or if you have, and it's a different sort. But because it's told from the point of view of the third person mostly, except occasionally it comes into the first and or second, and they have conversations among themselves, and you feel like you're the fly on the wall, listening in, but then you're not, because you're getting a whole different level of meaning coming out. And then you're trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, are they telling what they're thinking? Are they saying what they're really feeling? Or are they just telling me the story, so I'm supposed to go somewhere else with that? So just wanted to throw that out because that was incredibly deep and important that you brought up. So thank you very much for starting us off that way. And before I go further, does anybody else have anything they want to throw out? Ron?
I just want to say I felt the same way as Jazz did when I haven't read the book in 30 years, and I couldn't devote enough time to really get back into it. this time, but it just felt like there was so many characters and plot lines going on that and this is 30 years, so I wasn't in the same literary place I am now. And I stuck it out to the end of the book, but it was at the end of the book, I felt like I did not read the book. I felt like I just needed to go start again, like immediately. That's how I felt.
Wow. I love that though. I love that because I think, while he may not have intended that, it's actually a prophetic comment you just made, that you actually want to get to know these people. They've all been presented. They've all been laid out.
Right.
They've all played out all these dramas, these epiphanies, these ways of interacting with each other. And then all of a sudden you feel, wait a minute now, what happened here? And, one of the questions I had in mind before I jump into what I have prepared, would you want to be friends with any of these people, and why? Do you have friends like these people, and why?
I got friends like those people, and they're probably more of the interesting people who I know. So yeah, I would not want to be in a position like Vivaldo trying to save Rufus from himself. I'm not going to jump into that pool. But yeah, I mean, it's a little melodramatic at times, and I get caught up in that. So when I'm reading through it, I'm trying to get through, get the points, see what my takeaways are. And then I get really slowed down by, oh, okay, so this is going on and that's going on. I did want to speak to something that Jazz said about things being the point of view of different characters. And I didn't feel as though anything was a point of view. I felt as though there was this really distant narrator who would put the characters under a microscope at different times when they were going through different things. So I know, so I wouldn't call it a point of view like at the beginning. Rufus is under the microscope, right? And then it moves to someone else being under the microscope, and it moves to another person. So it might reveal the character's point of view, but I didn't feel as though the narrator was actually going into a point of view for the character. That's it.
Thank you. That really is a great expansion of what Jazz asked and said, as well as what we've said before. Anyone else have more they want to add?
Richard just reminded me, it could be like a play, like enters Rufus, exits Rufus, and then back and forth. So it's more like a play format.
Well, that is really insightful because he wrote several plays. There's a wonderful conversation that I have extracted as I work on my own stuff I'm working on related to all this, in trying to write some stuff myself, and in which he discusses the theater. And he apprenticed himself to the Actors Studio when he was invited to do so by Elia Kazan. So when he created the play called Blues for Mr. Charlie, which I saw a lot and was very involved with in a different way, he spoke to the need to really look at what theater is and what how do we dramatize the realities of life that he wanted to capture in the way in which he could extract and excavate, basically, the way in which people behaved, the way in which people were with each other. And during that time in that play, which was 1964, by the way, when it was on Broadway, its effort was to reveal racism and everything that was going on in the country at the time in a very significant way to shake people up. And people literally couldn't handle it and would walk out of the theater every night because they didn't want to be told who they were. They didn't want to be told who, and they didn't want the narration certainly to imply that there was something wrong with them. And they didn't want, and maybe they came to just be, quote, entertained. But he had very strong feelings about what the theater should be to reveal the truth, as much as he did with all the other things he wrote and in every other form that he wrote them. So from Amen Corner, his first play, to this, to Blues for Mr. Charlie, all done in that similar time frame, it was the height of so much of his writing. So I think that's really wonderfully insightful, Anna, that you picked up on that, as it feels like a play, and for good reason. You know, I think he very much intended to present these people. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Ray.
I just want to piggyback off of what Anna said about the play, and I felt that same thing. I kind of likened it to Midsummer Night's Dream in a way. Just, you know, the characters in a kind of dreamlike state, sometimes, you know, going out of their comfort zone into the other country of another's bedroom, perhaps, you know, taking these risks, you know, and then, you know, the novel ends the night after, or the day after, excuse me, and reality sets back in. And there's a kind of an awakening. And then, of course, you know, at the final few pages, Eve is, you know, coming from another country, descending into New York. And it also, I guess, the crafts work of the novel, you know, it begins with also a kind of a falling from the sky, or falling from the bridge of Rufus. So it's kind of a, and the novel takes place in between those kinds of scenes.
Yeah, it sets the stage for the exposition that is about to happen. And everything ties to that exposition in terms of the characters who have a connection and a relationship to the whole beginning, falling from the sky, technically. So that's great insight as well. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'm going to move into a couple of things and take us deeper, I hope. So book one, as you recall, or if you don't, and you watch the recordings later, I positioned this as a concept of looking at the truth, because I think whether you put this in the category of a novel, or you put it in the category of a play, or an essay, even for that matter, but especially in the areas of what is called fiction, I saw that as being seeing truth, uncovering truth, and presenting all the characters and their truths or their lies. In book two, we talked about love a lot. We talked about loneliness a lot, because those are the overriding emotions and feelings that were expressed through the interactions and the getting to know each of the characters, and their pulls and tugs at trying to tell us who they are. In this book, I focused in my own reading of it again as a focus on 4 keywords: home, the choices people make, honesty, and forgiveness. And if we go back to what I was talking about in the last session, in terms of who the book's dedicated to, and the quotes that he cites, which I think very much foreshadow a lot of what is meant in his intention in this book. The people in his life, and then later, the quotes that follow reveal an extraordinary deep intellect of Jimmy, by Jimmy, extraordinarily provocative thought, informed by what he read. And as we talked about to some degree, he was a self-educated man throughout his life. He finished DeWitt Clinton High School, and he never went to formal education again of any sort, other than occasionally some things. And he journeyed through his life and wrote about his life as he defined for himself that he had to be a good writer. So when you remember that he started with Henry James, he started with Conrad, and now in this one, he starts with Shakespeare. So book 3, how with this rage shall beauty hold a plea, whose action is not stranger than a flower. To me, it foreshadows and it tells not only his commitment to who he revered as people that he admired who could create the written word or the spoken word, and again, a play, well, Shakespeare, and of course the sonnets. It foreshadows biblically. Remember, we talked about his being influenced, of course, because he was a child preacher. And then, of course, his whole upbringing was within the Pentecostal church. But then he broke from it. But for me, it foreshadows biblically, as it says right there on the page, toward Bethlehem. So how is this country of friends and people finding their way home? How, if they do, and what does home mean to you? And that's why I picked the word home. How are the choices we make in life relevant to what home means and what influences all of that? He has written, home is not a place, but an irrevocable condition. So for him, it is an inward experience, and it is a place that we create and we keep creating, and it makes us, as a result, over and over and over again. So I think the important question then becomes, what does home mean to you? What do choices mean? And how can we be honest and forgive each other? Another really important quote that a friend of mine who started a Baldwin for the Arts program uses as her main quote is, "The place in which I'll fit will not exist until I make it." So his entire life was for searching home for him. And when he did, in fact, spend the last decade, almost 2 decades of his life in a particular house in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, it became home to him. But he always realized that it was something he created. He had to have gone through and did go through extraordinary ups and downs, very much like the characters in this book. And he had to figure out where he was most comfortable so he could be away from a lot of things and people so he could become the good writer he wanted to become. So I do think it's critical to note that another thing he wrote, you don't have it home until you leave it. And then when you have left it, you can never go back. So what do you think about all that in light of what we've just read? Richard?
Sorry, I never shut up. But one, you were talking about what he read, and I think also something that should be added is what he listened to,
Yeah.
you know, from the Bessie Smith and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
which led me to think about what is home. And then I started to go into Papa was a Rolling Stone, wherever he laid his hat was his home. And to an extent, I feel as though that's been my life. But then, unlike him, I feel as though at least my experience in New York has been an addiction. And I have tried to leave New York. I have moved out several times, but I can't stay away, you know? So it's not like I can't go back. It's that I can't leave. Wherever I go, New York is in me, and it's trying to pretty much put a lasso on me and drag me back. So that's just my thought.
Did you
I
say
think-
you're originally from New York? Did you say that?
No, I'm sorry. I'm from Illinois, and I moved here when I was 18. So I've been here, you know, you can look at me, that's like, you know, 5 years ago.
A couple of years, right?
Couple of years ago, yeah.
Couple of years, more like 40. And so no, this was not, you know, I found this home, or it found me, actually, I would say, in the sense that it kept dragging me back. Even when I hated it and left it, I was so uncomfortable in other places that I had to come back very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I had a really cheap, nice apartment, I moved out. and then, you know, of course, came back and lived in a hovel.
Right. Thank
Carole,
you.
Carole, you touched on it briefly. So James Baldwin graduates Stewart Clinton. He does not go to college. What is his point? He's clearly an intelligent person. One, why didn't he go to college? Just, you know, even if you're not interested in getting a degree, many people will just matriculate through college because that's what they're expected to do.
Right.
Also, how did he frame the person he thought he would become without college? It seems like for many public intellectuals, that's where they kind of are bouncing off of other academics and intellectuals, and that kind of frames their life going forward. I'm in another book club, and we're reading the work of bell hooks. You know, I've been watching a lot about Cornel West recently. Almost all public intellectuals, no matter how accessible they want to be, still go through college and still frame their work within the academy. And why didn't James Baldwin just go for 4 years to get it out the way?
In my humble opinion, the facts of the matter, the reality of his life did not include that. He took the responsibility to help raise his siblings. he felt the need to work and help his mother raise the siblings when his father died. He wasn't, frankly, educated and aware about college. It was, even though, yes, Stuart Clinton encouraged it, pushed it, educated to a certain degree, but he didn't think about it in the way that a whole lot of people do who are on a somewhat of a continuum because their families bring it forward. And I'll make it personal in this regard. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a very poor family, and nobody went to college. I had two brothers. One of them finally did go and get a business degree, but I was the first one of the three of us in my immediate family who decided, I'm going to college, I'm advancing my life, and I'm going to try and have every experience in life I can have across the world as well. And I did, in fact, live up to that. But it was a decision I had to make. And then when I had my son, that's what made me understand, actually, the whole spectrum of colleges, choices, you know, even there was things called private schools. I mean, I am a product of, you know, all schools in Brooklyn, New York, which included Mark Twain Junior High School and Lincoln High School, and then Brooklyn College, and then City College. And then finally, I went to Teachers College at the end, only because I had a real job in a firm that would pay a few bucks and subsidize me. But so when you come from a family that is quite poor, that has no examples, that has lived through so much of the streets in terms of what you see and the reality of them affecting you personally, and then your own challenges, and of course what he went through emotionally with his stepfather and having to overcome the hatred that he didn't want to make part of his life, he decided he had to first support, first help. And, you know, there's a wonderful thing he wrote and said at some point, I can't remember exactly the context right now, but when you are family, we are part of each other. So he took this all incredibly seriously and incredibly personally. And to me, this book was about, it's an extraordinary personal book. He lived these streets. He was all these people. This is such a personal life story, even though it's fiction. And he, by going through all of this, decided he finally had to leave in 1948. And he could leave then because by then the kids were older and he felt that he had to, and his mother encouraged him to do so because she said, I see you have to write, go write. And she was always there for him. And she's the one who taught him about love. Extraordinary, unqualified love. And he carried it forward. So for him, it was family, but yet it was, how am I going to make a difference so I can come back and take care of family and or make it happen and or have a life that is global, that is inclusive across the board. So therefore, the thought of college in his world was unrealistic for him. It was not practical for him. And early on, he became an extraordinarily practical person. And therefore, he made practical decisions. Anyone else want to?
Thank you.
Yeah, Sung.
Yeah, I want to point out one more thing regarding Ron's question. I think many great writers hardly were educated. I think their life experience were like their school. So they don't they have no need to go to school and learn from teachers.
Yeah.
And that's and I also want to mention about Carole's question about home. to me, my home is when I go to nature, I feel really like it's my home. So I need a place to shelter from rain or for privacy, but I really feel in the nature. That's my home. And thank God when I die, I'll be forever in nature.
Right.
And you guys were talking about cemetery, and my idea of cemetery is like, people, why people don't plant trees on grave. It should be like that, and it'd be more beautiful experience to die and just to turn into trees.
Right. Thank you, Sung. That is a lovely addition to the whole concept as well on a very personal level. And one more thing, Ron, you just reminded me of that I think is very important. There's an extraordinary essay or two or three that Jimmy wrote about education and teaching, actually several things. And there's a very famous one called The Talk to Teachers. And a couple of years ago, I went up to Teachers College in their, although I wasn't in the program for education, I was in the adult learning program in the professional world at that time of work. But they did a whole week conference on his work, and I went to participate in it. But what I was reminded of then was the extraordinary essay on A Talk to Teachers. So take a look at that, read that. And I think it will also give you some more insights, and that goes for everybody, as to what he thought of education. He did not, even though he had gone to perhaps the best high school. I know you'll all attack me from DeWitt Clinton if I say anything different, but I do agree from what I heard and learned it was an unusually good one.
At the time.
At the time, thank you very much, Anna. Thank you. At the time,
Shots fired.
everything is at the time, isn't it, Anna? So he had a lot of his own take and understanding of what education should be. And one of the most important things in that essay that I'm poorly recalling, because my memory sucks at my old age, is how he wrote so many wonderful things about the minute you're educated. What does it do? It makes you have new thoughts. It makes you perceive things differently. It shakes you up. And he felt that the purpose of education at that time wasn't doing what it should be doing. So he had a lot of challenges and issues and problems with what he thought he would get from spending his time doing that, when the immediate need was, I need to help support this family.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. Okay.
Just have one
ahead,
thing,
Richard,
one quick thing.
No,
Based on what you were saying was, a need to do something else than college, because I didn't finish college. And I think I've, told a couple people here, I started a company during a year off, and it was supposed to be a summer job. It became a much bigger thing. So I had the responsibility. Wasn't a family, but it was a family of people who were dependent on me covering their paycheck at the end of the week, right? But I had no regrets because I didn't identify with higher education. I mean, not that, with an institution. Right. I had, I was at Columbia, my identity was not tied into that in the least. I went to a really good prep school. It was not tied into that in the least. I don't talk to many people from there because that is all, they're stuck there, right? I never wanted to be like that. I never wanted to be stuck in that high school. And because of that, I realized that I didn't want to have an identity based on where I was educated. And that's where I was. So, I just was like, I don't care. You know,
No.
I'm getting my life lesson here.
Right. Well, all of that is critically important. And I will understand it all because I went through my own journey with it. And then I went through my own journey trying to change it, becoming an educator in the high school system, then the poverty programs, then leaving it and doing, you know, other work. But my commitment's always been there. I'm all about learning. You know, how do I make learning worthy? How do I take the opportunity when people are gathered together to walk out of a room that they've been in differently? How does whatever occurs in that room affect and change the way you think, the perception of what you think you knew when you walked in the door, and then how do you walk out of it differently? And it's a continuous process. So once I learned how to name what I was doing, the more I understood myself about my education and how important it is. And I totally understand why a lot of people don't want to just simply follow the usual route of something if it's not going to help them. And they have to find their own creative ways to educate. So in his case, his way was to continuously read and read everything he could imaginable. And at the same time, and as you well said, listen as well, because music was a critical infuser for him. And it was very important to him in his whole development and his whole life, for sure. So in his writing, it became very much something that is part of his writing, not only the way he uses language, and all you have to do is start to try to read some of these sentences out loud, and especially several of them that resonate in a particular way for each of us. And you realize it is poetry. It is incredibly deep and important and intelligent. And no college degree was going to ever give him that in the first place. I mean, he had to go through it himself. So moving on. Okay, so when in the book, in this chapter, there's a wonderful section talking about how important his writing is from my perspective, whether it's within the fictional context or the prose or anything else. When you're older, you'll see, I think, that we all commit our crimes. The thing is not to lie about them, to try to understand what you have done and why you've done it. That way, you can begin to forgive yourself. That's very important. If you don't forgive yourself, you'll never be able to forgive anybody else, and you'll go on committing the same crimes forever. So there he is raising the concept of forgiveness, the concept of redemption, again, very spiritual, biblical. But throughout everything that follows in this last book, he shows everyone, I think, their nakedness. He reveals how they're all struggling to become who they want to become, as opposed to who they thought they wanted to be. And to me, that is really important. And I think a very important intention of this novel. They were all delusional. They allowed themselves to live under illusion. And instead, how do they play this all out within and among each of them? How can they be together, alone, differently, as defined by our own needs and as defined by how we want to define ourselves? Vivaldo is testing out his sense of identity and his perception and feelings about what love is. And so are the rest of this world of characters. Eric, Richard, Cass, Ida. Who of them do you most, if at all, have any empathy, sympathy for? I mean, Cass says to Eric in the museum, oh, she's talking about Richard. He doesn't have any real work to do. That's the trouble. That's the trouble with this whole unspeakable time and place. And I'm trapped. And next comes this really important line. We are what time and circumstance have made us and what we have made of both. This isn't a country. We think we're happy. We're not. We're doomed. Then Ida and Richard are at their apartment and they bring out their racial perspectives, hopes, dreams, disappointments, their issues, challenges, nightmares regarding men versus women and how hurting each other revengefully through their relationship has not clarified anything new. So Rivaldo reflects after Ida tells him everything. Not many things in the world were really black. Black coffee was not as it was. It was in fact deep brown. Not even the night is black, not even the minds. And the light was not white either. Even the palest light held within itself some hint of its origins in fire. He finally had the truth about Ida and he didn't know how he was going to live with it. So that led me then to focus on this idea of the choices. So much of how we feel and think about ourselves plays out in the choices we make in our personal lives, in our choice of professions or our ways to live our lives, where to live our lives, whether we live alone or we live with others. These choices also determine the extent to which we are artists who need aloneness to create, and or whether we work in places which require a lot of others, and how we see and use time at different stages of our lives. So how do you feel about your own choices, which are driven by your own way of defining your own identity?
Because everyone is listening, I love to talk.
Right.
Talking about choices, my policy, my strategy is that not to make any choice. So, and whatever comes, just take look at, take the good side or advantage or benefit. I mean, more likely focusing on good side, whatever comes.
Okay. Other?
We have all made bad choices, and some of us probably get religious about it and ask God to forgive us. I think James Baldwin is such a, like all those characters that you said of him, and I could have probably identified with like the meeting of the writers. He probably at one time didn't feel like, maybe he felt like Richard, or maybe he felt like Valdo. But what I don't understand is his constant struggle with black and white, even though they try to skim through it like, everything's not really black, everything's not really white. But that is the main issue. I mean, and him, Ida, and Vivaldo, you know. And at the end, to me, it was like, what do you call it? Like, it wasn't, I expected that to happen. So it was like, you know, it's like, even though I was reading along, I'm saying, damn, what's going to happen now? Oh no, he went to bed with him too. Oh, okay. So, you know, it's like, kind of, and I haven't read a lot of his stuff. So now I'm really curious to read more of his stuff, but is it the same, you know, like he's always has this constant thing, of course, being in the 60s or 50s, you know, all this racism and everything, but that was never resolved, was it?
Well, just look at the country we live in. Has it been resolved?
I know, right?
Not in my book.
No, I know, but in the book, I'm just saying, since he brings it up, he never really, there's no resolution, like.
No, but the difference in him, and I certainly hope a few more of you will comment, but the difference with him is he didn't look at things only in black and white. He crossed lines more than probably any writer out there, and especially of his time. He tried to leave himself open to a life that included every sort of imaginable friend, person, lover, etc., which is rare. He did not put himself in any boxes. He didn't want to be, and said it in many, 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 many ways in other writing that he did. And I do encourage you to look at his other novels, his short stories, and even his poems and his plays. So the point is this, that you take from it what you feel, and that is valid. But he really wanted a life that was not as possible. He wanted a world, I should say. And he did. He was a man who thought philosophically, psychologically, and intellectually, more than a lot of writers. And that's why so many people are waking up to the importance of what he was trying to say. And it was to have a world with no boundaries of race, with no boundaries of different points of view, with no boundaries that obviously mean people hate each other. It was quite the opposite. He was the epitome of love, actually. You know, there's another statement that I wrote down that I thought, a couple of statements that I think capture some things, Anna, that you're talking about. He wrote, the responsibility of the writer is to excavate the experience of the people who produced him. So his mission was to describe what produced him. This book being one example, because this book is quite a real book. It was also captured the concept similarly in the primary distinction of the artist is that he must actively cultivate that state which most men necessarily must avoid, the state of being alone. And finally, an identity which seemed to be arrived at by the way in which the person faces and uses his experience. So he, in narrating his experiences, in putting them in any kind of form, whether it be novel, whether it be a theater piece, whether it be a poem, whether it be an essay, were all for the intent of trying to tell the world about his experience for the lessons one can learn. And he could never ignore what he grew up in and what he was subject to, because he was attacked by so many people at every level, including extremely highly educated folks. And one of the reasons was because he would always speak to what he thought and saw. So he would have certain relationships with certain extremely well-educated folks, but at the same time, he would then say something, write something, or act in such a way that they would start to put him down, tear him apart, not be interested. And his writing evolved, of course, as well. So if you look at the film, for example, that was made of If Beale Street Could Talk, that is a love story. It's a love story that I encourage you to read, because reading it and seeing it are two different experiences. But what they reveal is a great deal about what he knew and experienced as what love can be. And the same holds true for some of the other books and some of the short stories in particular, which speak to the influences of everything else in his life that made a difference in the way he wrote and what he wrote about. Anybody else like to chime in? Yeah, Ray.
I have a lot of hope for Vivaldo and Ida, you know, at the end that they can accept each other, and you know, it's kind of like, to me, a place where love can exist. Back when you were saying, you know, like, who do we sympathize with? I found it difficult to, you know, I told Sung about this, you know, Richard, you know, he's just terrible. You know, I would never be able to want him as a friend or anything like this, you know. But on the other hand, he was the one who requires the most sympathy.
Yep.
So, you know, if you're going to be sympathetic, you know, you may as well go all the way.
Thank you. Other reactions?
Well, I do relate to the being alone, because if you're trying to write something, you aren't ever alone. You know, so what we might call being alone is actually just removing a few distractions.
Right.
Because you're actually just walking down the street, you're writing something. You know, sometimes, I mean, I personally forget quite often that I didn't send an email, because I'm walking down the street composing the email, and then I just assume that I must have done it on a computer and hit send. You know, so I just think that there's a big difference between being alone and being lonely, and there's a significant difference between the two. Alone never is really without communication, without voices, without developing things. Lonely is a state of depression, just, you know, like kind of a self-imposed thing for a lot of people. Some people maybe deserve to be lonely, but you know, I think there's a big distinction between the two.
There is, and thank you for that. Any other thoughts?
I want to share one thing about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Or in my culture or in my kind of religion, there's no such word like forgiveness. And I am empathetic with. You know, personally, I make all kinds of mistakes. You know, I have a lot of flaws, as Ray knows so well. So I don't feel like, oh, he did such a terrible thing, I cannot forgive him.
Well, that's really helpful in giving us another perspective on how to think about that. And forgiveness overall in at least this particular country is interpreted so differently depending on which groups you affiliate with, how you identify, and so on. And it implies in certain worlds within this country, the capacity or not of then bringing forward feelings of hatred, feelings of shutting down, feelings of not becoming a person who can be more caring. There's a phrase I came across because I was preparing some notes for something else I'm doing. And I came across this phrase, the ethics of care. And I'm very intrigued with that, because what does that exactly mean in light of, for example, this world, this other country, or the countries of the minds of the people in this another country? And what does care mean in terms of what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of country we want to become? And it's defined entirely differently and accordingly to what people use as their guides, whether it be a particular religion, a particular affiliation, or particular selfishness and or psychology. For example, people who are narcissistic don't evidence any concern for care. So do we, or can we, forgive narcissistic people? Can we understand people who consider themselves extremely religious, even if we're not? Can we accept people who say, this is who I am, if they are able to do that? And I don't think most people can do that. I used to do an exercise in classes I taught across the board in my career. And one of them, and I always started with, I don't want you to tell me where you work. I don't want you, I don't want to do the usual stuff. I just want you to answer one question: who are you? And I cannot tell you not only the fun I had as a educator, teacher, and throwing that kind of question out there, but it was really for a purpose to create dialogue, conversation, so that when people walked out of that class, whether it be a one-day event or weeks and weeks, they opened up. That's what happened, because I released, or I unleashed, the possibility of them talking about anything, and there were no more barriers, right? And with that, sometimes I would encourage people to assume an identity they wish they had. So I would always pick Elizabeth Taylor, because I thought she was beautiful. I'm not into that stuff. I'm not into, all the stuff that goes with makeup and beauty and all of that. I care more about the person I am inside and outside. But I just always picked her because for whatever reason, I think it was the movies, she appealed to me as, boy, that woman was so independent and she gutsy, and, and I wanted to be like her, I guess.
Maybe it was Richard Burton.
Maybe, yeah. No, that's great, Anna. Yeah, Richard probably had something to do with it. Yeah. Yeah, and also the drama of their lives together was unbelievable. So probably was the mix. I love that. Thank you. Cool. Yeah. But so what I'm trying to get at is how we do in fact figure out who we want to be within our lives, which I think is a lot to do with this book. What kind of that country home, or whatever you want to call it, has everything to do with the people we want to keep in it or out of it or around it or part of it. And that's part of home for me, you know. So what other thoughts do you all have?
Well, just briefly, I wanted to just again about Vivaldo, just getting back to the novel
Yes.
and Ida, that's the choice that he has there is forgiveness, and you know, and it resolves itself because I think it comes up as an issue, you know, in that, you know, he has the choice, and this is to me what a novel should bring us to, you know, to this idea of choice. But then I'm thinking also of Eve and Eric. Eve coming back to Eric, and you know the potential distance between them as they come closer. You know, and you know the role of that forgiveness might play in their relationship.
Ray, do you think that Vivaldo should tell Ida about his little, what do you want to call it? His episode.
His own escapades?
Huh?
His own escapades, you know, the double standard that he might have.
Do you think they'll be, you think Ida will forgive him for him?
And Eric?
And Eric, yeah.
Right. That too.
What do you think?
I think so. I mean, I think Ida is kind of like you know, a person in a blooming state, or you know, at a kind of a crossroads in her life. You know, a place where, you know, the pressures have really forced her to make some choices.
It's a compromise, right? It's a compromise. I did wrong, you did wrong. Let's forget about it. And
I would say that just to interrupt, I would say that forgiveness is really more like empathy, right? If you know, you were talking about a narcissist, that's somebody who really has a mental illness, and you can't really forgive somebody for, well, unless they become president, you can't really forgive somebody for being mentally ill, right? Sorry. Apologize if that offended
No, don't
anyone,
apologize. It's fine.
okay. But I think you need to have empathy with the fact that they're going through something that they may not even know that they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really need, you know, you don't forgive somebody for having cancer, right?
Right.
You have empathy. You have a fear that it might happen to you. But if you feel as though, you know, you have to forgive them, then boy, it's going to hang over you in such a negative way. You know, so anyway, and I just wanted to kind of express that thought that that a lot of times people who you might want to forgive, actually they deserve empathy, not forgiveness, you know, and not a second term. Anyway, I'll end on that.
Well, all of what you have highlighted is, to me anyway, really important and has to be considered in how we, I hate to use this word, but I will, judge. In other words, you can't forgive, you can't think about forgiveness without thinking about judging, because you're making a decision about putting it in that box of what your opinion is about the behavior or whatever it is that you are positioned to forgive. And I think it's a really important thought concept, and yet again, an example of why I think this book is so important, because it brings forward this world of characters who were birthed from a reality that he experienced in creating it, but at the same time interact in ways that you are being presented to you as the observer. And again, whether it's, as we began this conversation, whether it's in the perspective or from the perspective of a play, or whether it's a novel or whatever category you want to put it in, it is this country of people that we have to deal with if we really want to look at how people can be with each other or not be with each other. And I think that is really the message here. How do we create the country that we want? And that country can be defined as an individual country, a shared country, as a global country, or whatever. And it is, in fact, an emphasis on, well, it's a world of another country. So what kind of country do you want? What kind of country should we have?
I just think that, well, I don't even know about that. I don't know how to answer that question, at least for right now and what's going on in the world. But especially in the context of like the times that he was writing this, especially how the timing of everything. I just think it's fascinating that here's a person who didn't go to college but writes such a world and is like mirroring the things that he is seeing, but like saying it in such a different way that can be interpreted in so many different things. And you know, I just like listening to everybody is very, like I said, it's helpful to listen to everybody and trying to put in perspective this book, but it's also like still sitting here like this man really created these stories in a way that we're still talking about it now, and it still relates even 20 whatever amount of years it is now, and like kind of deep diving into it and saying, wow, look what was happening back then and look what's happening now. And it's still, there's still a correlation. And this man who just was like, I'm not going to college, but I'm gonna write, and I'm gonna be so creative in the way the perspective is gonna come out. It's just kind of like people felt it. And I think, I don't know, historically, like at the time, did people feel it? Did they understand it? I feel like it might have been a little bit more controversial at the time. I'm not too sure historically, but it's just so fascinating that, you know, we're all trying to figure out like, why did he end it like this? And what did he do like this? And how, you know, the questioning what is another country? And it is, you know, even amongst the different boroughs, you in the Bronx, going to Brooklyn is another country. And then the communities and stuff. I just think it's beautiful the way he writes it and describes it, but also like, I don't know, it's just like you do get transported into a different world.
Right. Thank you so much. That was so precise and insightful in terms of taking the meaning of this and the potential impact of it. Anyone else want to add?
Well, because I always do. I got the feeling that another country is actually, we have a different country with every relationship that we have. That's where our country is. You know, everyone I'm looking at right now, I have a different relationship with, and each one is a country that you live in, you inhabit, right? And without a passport, you are going from one to another.
I think you're right on, Richard. I think that's exactly what he was trying to portray.
I wonder if he could have written this and like base it all in New York, you know, considering how diverse New York City is, and not have these sort of different locations as characters in the book.
You're asking
I'm just
Oh, well, yeah,
kind of
because,
guessing.
yeah, no, right. So look, remember the years. So this book was was the longest one for him to write. This book took him the longest of all his books. That says something important.
Mhm.
He was struggling with trying to figure out what he observed, what he witnessed, what he lived, what he experienced in the years that he lived in the village, in the years that he came from Harlem downtown, in the years that he lived in and out of other areas, but then finally left in 48. And this took him over a decade to finish. He finishes it in the very end of 63, and yet the first major country after France in particular, Turkey, right? And he finishes it there on his way supposedly to go cover some stories somewhere else. And he finally finishes it there and then realizes how exhausted and in a bad health state he was, and how he had to refresh and figure out what to do. And he very much was focused on, well, still I have hope, but I'm not very hopeful, but I have hope, because he never gave up on the possibilities of change. Otherwise, he couldn't have been a global person if he had. But in particular, I'm going to just jump back to that. One of the better pieces, I think, in reviewing this book that appears in the Basra's Review in Turkey. Baldwin's writing here has a penetrating clarity of sight about not just what America is, to your point, Anna, not just white supremacy, but also crass, shallow materialism and hypocrisy, but also what it could be in a positive sense, because he actually believes white folks are as capable of love and human solidarity as anything else. It takes courage to both depict the weakness and the hatred and the humanity of a people at the same time. At a time like now, when the United States feels like it's coming unraveled, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that his words, combined with King's, offer a last chance for redemption. In another country, Baldwin's characters have sudden traumatic epiphanies of having been living in a foreign country of their minds in regards to everything we've talked about, in contrast to the racist infrastructure of America. So you leave here, finishing the book, to decide if there's any hope, if any of the characters will catch a glimpse of whether a love free of political patterns of dominance or subordinates, racial or sexual baggage is possible. But one can believe that he wanted it to be so. And I do believe and know he wanted it to be so. But that's why, going back to where we started, why does he matter? That's why it matters. That's why he matters. That's why everybody is citing and clarifying and trying to figure out what happened. You know, this country never recognized him in the way I think he should have been. They gave him a stamp. They did some things. They have a school, James Baldwin High School, which is a charter school. You know, they have the lawn in St. Nicholas Park now. But you know who recognized him? The French. And he got the Legion of Honor. the year before he died. That is rather a heavy thought, I think, in terms of the meaning of his work and the meaning of his importance in the world of literature. And that includes everything we've talked about, you know, whether it be plays or novels or others. So.